on that. So thank you. Trinity's going to also be handing out cards again, just like we did after the last speaker. So any questions that you might have for Kelly, for her to address during the panel discussion, and Dr. Harlan's has some over there as well. Please feel free to fill those out for that. Our last speaker for the morning is Dr. Krista Varady. Did I say that correctly, I hope? Dr. Varady is joining us from the University of Illinois, Chicago, where she's a professor of nutrition. Her work has been focused on a variety of governmental, her work has been funded by a variety of governmental, nonprofit, and educational institutions. And so we're excited to hear about her interests in the efficacy of intermittent fasting for weight loss and metabolic disease studies in people with obesity. Much more of her details on her biography are in the conference webpage, also for your reference. And Dr. Varady, we want to hear your fun fact as well.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and thanks for the great introduction. Just to recap, my name is Krista Varady, and I'm a professor of nutrition at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And our lab's been studying intermittent fasting for about 20 years or so. We were actually one of the first labs to ever study this in humans. So, whoops. I'll just keep on talking. So intermittent fasting is basically, sorry. Okay. So intermittent fasting is basically a diet strategy that involves limiting the eating window every day. So it's also called time-restricted eating. It does, we're back, okay. And in general, people eat, if we look at observational studies, most people eat within about a 14-hour window each day. So essentially all time-restricted eating is doing is just cutting down the available hours of eating. So really just like shaving off those extra hours of eating to kind of whittle that window down to, most people choose anywhere from like 6 to 8 hours a day. So let me just walk you through what one of these days would look like. In general, if you do pick the 8-hour window, you can pick whatever you want, but most people pick an 8-hour window and then they place that from 12 to 8 each day. So you'd basically wake up, you wouldn't have anything, so you'd basically fast until noon that day. And by fast, I mean you can still have water or anything that doesn't contain calories, so like black coffee, tea without additives, that type of thing. And then at 12 o'clock, you could start eating. And from 12 to 8 that day, you can eat whatever you want, so you don't have to have any limitations on calories or carbs or anything. Obviously, you'd want to promote like healthier foods, but you don't have to follow a specific diet in that time frame. And then after 8 o'clock that day, you'd start your fasting window again. So that would be again like water and any kind of calorie-free beverages. And then you basically just do that every day. So what we noticed, before I studied time-restricted eating, that form of intermittent fasting I just showed you, I was studying this really like intense form of intermittent fasting called alternate day fasting, where people basically ate nothing one day and then whatever they wanted the next day, and it kind of flip-flopped like that. But we realized people really hated that diet for obvious reasons, because you couldn't eat anything every other day. So I started to notice probably about 7 or 8 years ago that time-restricted eating, this kind of like shortened window of time, started becoming like really popular. I started to see it on like social media, and just like books on Amazon were coming out. So I went to PubMed and I was like, oh, well, I wonder, seems like this is working for people. What's the data out there? And just about 7 years ago or so, there were no studies of time-restricted eating. So all this data and all this interest has really just happened since about 2016 or 17. So one of our first studies in this area was to see, well, does it actually work for weight loss? That's the main reason that people tend to follow it. So we designed this really simple study where we just compared this 8-hour eating window to a control group that just got to do whatever they want. The study was 12 weeks, so about 3 months. And the main thing we wanted to measure was adherence, so could people stick to it, and then also body weight and some metabolic disease risk parameters. And right off the bat, we found that people really liked these diets. They found it really easy to incorporate into their lifestyle, which is super important, because if people don't follow diet, you can give people all the advice in the world, but if they don't do it, then they're not going to reap any of the benefits from it. So we found that people stuck to it on about 6 out of 7 days per week, which was great. So they could do that 8-hour eating window, so cutting out about 6 hours per day of eating, and they didn't actually really complain about it that much. The days that they usually don't follow it are honestly like weekend days, like a Saturday, that involves like more social eating. But overall, our subjects also said that they would continue the diet after the study was over. So that was really promising, because obviously with the other form, the alternate day fasting, nobody wanted to, well, most people dropped out of the study, so. And then in terms of weight loss, we saw about 7 or 8 pounds of weight loss over 3 months. So it was about 2.6%. So obviously nothing on par with what we're seeing now with these like kind of amazing like weight loss drugs. I think it's always going to be a bit of a losing battle when it's, when we're comparing like nutrition strategies to these drug therapies, but it's still kind of on par with what you'd see with other like calorie counting regimens. And then I think one of our coolest findings in this area was that we found that, remember, when you eat in the 8-hour window, you don't have to count calories or monitor anything. So simply by just eating in that 8-hour window, people naturally reduce their calorie intake by about 350 calories per day. And again, without having to do any like logging in MyFitnessPal or anything like that. So we definitely thought, wow, that's probably why people like it. It's easy to do, doesn't require a lot of like vigilant like food record monitoring or anything like that. In terms of metabolic disease risk factors, we actually didn't see much of a change here, just like a slight decrease in blood pressure. But that's because we only saw 2.6% weight loss, and you usually need about a 5% weight loss to see any of those markers move. So cholesterol, blood pressure, A1C for people with diabetes, you really need, usually more like 10 to 15 pounds of weight loss to see that. So we found in this initial study really high adherence, some weight loss, and then this natural, kind of like unintentional reduction in calorie intake and small decreases in blood pressure. I get a lot of questions about, well, why is intermittent fasting so popular now? It seems like it kind of just came out of nowhere. Like no one talked about it 5 or 10 years ago, and now it's like, all the celebrities are doing it or whatever. I think, again, it's really because it doesn't involve tracking. Like so many of our previous diet fads in America, if you look at the 90s, it was all about like low-fat products and low-fat diets, and then it was all about carb counting in the early 2000s and Atkins and all this, and then calorie counting. And I think people are just sick of tracking things. Like people are so sick of going in a food record or on their phone and having to log like every single thing they're eating all day. So this is like a really simple way of reducing energy intake, which is the main thing that leads to weight loss, without having to really do anything except for watch the clock. So other things about it that are great are it's a free diet, so it's great for lower resource communities. You don't need nutrition literacy. It's super simple. You don't have to buy like expensive food products like power bars or shakes or anything like that to do it. And if you want to combine it with other diets, you can do that as well with some of the eating patterns that were just talked about in the previous lectures. So when we did our initial 8-hour eating window study, I wasn't super impressed. I wasn't impressed with like the amount of weight loss we had, and I still couldn't really figure out, well, why are people doing these diets if they're only like losing a few pounds? So I thought, well, maybe people aren't eating in an 8-hour window. maybe they're eating in a way shorter amount of time. And I got this idea from a bunch of people from like Silicon Valley started calling me. There was a bunch of like software engineers that were working at like Twitter, and they were saying that they were all eating in these like really short periods of time, like a OMAD, 1 meal a day diet, or 4-hour window diets. So I thought, okay, well, maybe that's what people are doing. They're really whittling down their eating window to produce more weight loss. So we ran kind of a more extreme version of our previous study, and we looked at a 4-hour eating window, and we placed that around dinner time, so we know people don't like to skip dinner. A 6-hour eating window, so 1 to 7 p.m., versus just a no intervention control group. And surprisingly, we actually found that people could stick to these really short windows of time. Admittedly, this study was only like 2 months long, so who knows what would happen if we continued it for longer. The clinical coordinator that ran the study also, like, the subjects loved her, so I feel like that's like a major confounding variable. She had like an aromatherapy machine running and like spa music. It was like I wanted to go. So I don't know, really high adherence. So we had the same thing where people were like sticking to the diet on like 6 out of 7 days per week, which kind of surprised us. And then because the window was shorter, people did start to lose weight a bit faster. So they lost 3.2% of weight in 2 months, so a shorter time than the last study. And that was about, for this group, it was about 9 to 10 pounds over 2 months. But again, you know, you do have to eat in these pretty short windows of time to achieve that. And they did lose more weight, mainly because they were just cutting out extra calories by eating in a smaller window of time. So instead of, with 8 hours, you cut out usually like 300 to 400 calories. With these really short windows of time, you just naturally cut out more like 500 to 600 calories. So that's what's resulting in that kind of boosted weight loss. With these shorter windows, we also started to see some improvements in diabetes risk markers. So nothing for blood sugar itself, but we did see decreases in fasting insulin and insulin resistance, which is a major indicator of blood sugar regulation. We didn't see any changes in blood pressure or lipids. Honestly, we don't see a lot of changes in blood pressure or cholesterol or triglycerides in our studies, but I think it's because a lot of our subjects are already, if they have issues with that, like high levels of cholesterol, they tend to already be on medications, so they're already in the normal range. And if somebody's already in the normal range for cholesterol and blood pressure, it's really hard to get that to move. So yeah, you won't see many changes there. So one of the other big questions I get with intermittent fasting is, well, how does it impact diet quality, particularly if you're eating in these really small time frames? So one thing that we basically do have people complete a food record once a month just to see what they're eating and how that changes. And what we've noticed is that people actually don't really change what they're eating. So in this study in particular, I was really worried because, you know, these people just did a 20-hour fasting window. So what are you gonna do? Are you gonna like immediately drive to like McDonald's or something, you know, just because you're like craving really high energy, just something to like satisfy you? But we found that people actually didn't really change what they ate throughout the study. So they weren't eating super well at the beginning, I have to admit, kind of a very typical American diet. And then they kind of just ate the same types of foods throughout the study, but just less of that, less of those foods. So, and that's what we're finding. We do have people meet with dietitians throughout our studies, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem to really impact eating behaviors that much, even with like personalized interventions. Hopefully, as clinicians, you're seeing something a bit different. But I really find it's hard for people to change their eating behaviors. It almost seems like something that's kind of ingrained in you as a child, and that it's really hard to change the types of foods that you crave and want to eat. So that's one thing we're noticing that it's not helping with. So it doesn't make diet quality worse, but it definitely doesn't make it better. So yeah, we saw high adherence with these short eating windows, this natural reduction in energy intake that resulted in about 9 to 10 pounds of weight loss over 2 months. So another major question we had was, well, is time-restricted eating better than just regular dieting? So calorie counting, that's another kind of big question in the field. So for this, we wanted to look at it over a longer term, so we decided to run a 12-month study instead. And we compared this TRE, so a time-restricted eating group, to CR, which is a calorie counting group, and then just a control group. We split our study into a 6-month weight loss phase, followed by a 6-month weight maintenance phase. During the weight loss phase, that intermittent fasting group did that 8-hour window. And then we also wanted to see if these diets work to help people keep the weight off, because that's a huge thing in obesity interventions. You know, a lot of people can get down to their goal weight, but then the question is, well, how do they sustain that? So we were the first ones to really test intermittent fasting for weight maintenance, so we didn't really know what to do, so we decided to kind of just widen the window out. So for weight maintenance, they did a 10-hour window instead of an 8-hour eating window. And then in the calorie counting group, we basically had them consume around 1,500 calories a day for most people, so we cut out about 25%, or we tried to lower their energy intake by about 25%. And the study involved about 90 people randomized to these 3 different groups, so 30 per each group. And we didn't have many dropouts, so that's one of the main things we look at when we run these studies. Do people drop out because they hate the diet? And we had very few dropouts, which was great. And if you're interested in who's in our studies, it's primarily, we're in the kind of downtown Chicago area. So it's, we mainly get I'd say like middle-aged women, primarily Black and Hispanic individuals with usually fairly healthy, so their blood pressure and cholesterol is within the normal range. So here we wanted to see, well, can people stick to intermittent fasting better than calorie counting? And it's really hard to compare those two things because one involves counting time and the other one involves counting calories. So we found that over the course of the year, people could stick to this intermittent fasting approach, the 8-hour diet, for up to a year. It's still the same thing on about 6 out of 7 days per week. So it is something that's sustainable over longer term than just 2 or 3 months. So we found that out. And then in our calorie counting group, they didn't do as well. Only about 60% of our subjects were able to stick to those like calorie goals. And they were basically just doing the typical thing where they like monitor calorie intake using MyFitnessPal on their phone. But interestingly, to answer the question, well, does fasting produce more weight loss than a traditional diet, calorie counting? No, it doesn't. They both produce the same amount of weight loss, so around 5%. In this group, it was about 13 to 14 pounds over 6 months. And then they were able to maintain that weight loss by just widening out that window from 8 hours to 10 hours. So that was also a pretty exciting finding. In this study, we found that both the groups, so the calorie counting group and the fasting group, ended up achieving the same amount of calorie reduction, so around 400 calories or so. But remember, all the time-restricted eating group had to do was watch the clock, and the other one had to literally write down everything they ate over the course of a whole year. So really different kind of like time involvement. We didn't see any changes in blood pressure in this group. In either of the groups. Also, plasma lipids didn't change, so cholesterol levels or triglyceride levels. But we did again see some nice increases in insulin sensitivity, which is an indicator of diabetes risk markers, so of blood sugar regulation. So I also get a lot of questions about, well, are these diets safe? Are they easy to do? And I have to admit, the first 10 days are kind of rough. So any type of intermittent fasting, if you do prescribe this to your patients, the first 10 days, it just takes your body a while to adjust to this new eating pattern. It kind of feels like traveling to, a different continent where you're really jet lagged because you're basically all your body clocks have to like readjust to this new eating pattern. So some people get, a bit of nausea or some GI upset or constipation with them in the first 10 days, but that tends to go away after about a week or so. The main thing we see is headaches. So we often get that reported like right, day 1 or 2 of these diets. And it's usually because their dehydration induced headaches. So usually it's just because people aren't consuming enough water. So if you ask them to up their water intake, those headaches tend to go away. But those are the main things. Other than that, there hasn't been many safety issues. So with this kind of longer term study, what we found was that fasting does not result in better body weight loss. Overall, there's not one diet that's like better than any other diet. Just having been doing nutrition research for a while now, really you just have to find whatever works for that particular patient, like what fits into their lifestyle, what can they do long term. So there's not, it's not like one is the best diet or anything like that. So yeah, and I think intermittent fasting is a really nice option for a lot of people, again, because it's just so simple and it doesn't involve a lot of tracking. And because of that, you get pretty high adherence for months and months. So most recently, we just published a study in people with type 2 diabetes. I was a little scared of running this study, obviously just because of like issues with blood sugar regulation, and I was scared that people may become hypoglycemic during the fasting period. But let me just show you what we found. So this study, again, we tested that 8-hour eating window, compared it to a calorie counting diet, which is kind of like the standard diet for people with type 2 diabetes, and then versus a control group. We found the same thing that we find with most of our other studies. People stick to the diets on about 6 out of 7 days per week. The calorie counting group didn't fare as well. Only about 70% of the people were able to stick to their calorie goals throughout the 6-month trial. And then, interestingly, this is probably one of the first studies where we ever saw this. In people with type 2 diabetes, these people tend to lose a bit more weight with intermittent fasting than calorie counting, which surprised me. So there hasn't been a lot of studies. This has to be repeated. But we found that the people in the fasting group lost about twice as much weight as the people in the calorie counting group. So for this particular study, I think it was like 9 pounds versus like 4 or 5 pounds. And then we weren't quite sure why this happened, because we've done a lot of studies where we compare fasting to just traditional diets or other diets, and they always tend to do the same. But one thing we found in looking at all of our like survey data that we took was that people with type 2 diabetes were just really sick of being told to do like carbohydrate counting or calorie counting. So they found intermittent fasting to be this great kind of alternative. And they were really motivated by that, because if you look at like the diabetes nutrition guidelines, it's always just like carb counting and calorie counting. And again, all the constant tracking. So yeah, they said basically they just found time restricted eating a lot easier to do, so they stuck to it. And the calorie restriction group said that they just found the diet really difficult, so they stopped doing it. We also saw some nice changes in glycemic control. So basically, the intermittent fasting group ended up lowering their A1C, that kind of key marker of diabetes risk, by a full point. Which was great. So, and that's kind of on par with what you see with pharmacological interventions as well. And they did start to slowly come off their diabetes medications. So insulin usage was reduced, and also use of people with type 2 are on a whole host of medications, but they were able to lower their metformin doses, etc. And then in terms of safety in this group, we actually didn't see any changes when we compared the fasting group to calorie counting in terms of hypoglycemia or hyperglycemic events. So when we were comparing that to the control group, so there weren't actually any issues with really high and low blood sugar. But I do have to say we're working with an endocrinologist, obviously, and then you do need to adjust people's medications before they start intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting is not something somebody with type 2 diabetes can just like read on social media and try to do themselves, which is super important. You will need to adjust certain medications, specifically insulin and sulfonylureas. And we do have that in our published papers, like how to change what medications need to be changed and by how much, depending on the person's A1C level. But just to point that out, yeah, definitely need to work with an endocrinologist. So just to summarize here, in people with type 2 diabetes, seems it may actually produce more weight loss than standard care diet, and it can lower A1C by almost a full point, which was pretty exciting. And it was pretty safe, no adverse events were reported. So the other question I get is, well, what happens to body composition with these diets? So fat mass versus muscle mass. And just to point out, when anyone loses weight with like any kind of diet, about 75% of the weight loss is fat mass, and 25% of the weight you're losing is muscle mass. And that happens with every diet. So it's just because your whole body's getting smaller. So your body's drawing from both your fat compartments and your muscle compartments to literally like make the person a smaller person. And it's the same with intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. So no matter what, you're always going to lose a little bit of muscle mass with dieting. The only way to kind of change that is to add resistance training specifically. So it has to be like a weightlifting type of thing, not running or anything like that. It has to be like weightlifting, resistance training, and then you would need to combine that with like a slightly higher protein intake. And those studies have shown that people can maintain their muscle mass when they do that. So some other practical considerations I just want to point out. So I get a lot of questions about, well, who should not do intermittent fasting? I definitely don't think it's appropriate for children under the age of 12. There's just a lot of, the puberty and growth and that type of thing. You wouldn't want to you wouldn't want to be fasting during that time. It is a little controversial, but there are a lot of studies coming out now in teenagers with intermittent fasting, and it's teenagers with severe obesity and type 2 diabetes. And it's been shown to actually help people get back into the normal weight range and then also pretty much almost reverse their type 2 diabetes as teenagers. And these are studies being run by like pediatric endocrinologists. Right now, I probably wouldn't recommend it for more of an elderly population, so people over the age of 75. Those people are at risk of losing a lot of muscle mass with dieting. So in general, I'd probably hesitate to advise it for anyone over 75 yet until we get more safety data in that population group. There's some studies that are coming out now in pregnant women with severe obesity. But still, I don't know. I don't think there's enough safety data yet for intermittent fasting in pregnant women at all. So I'd also not advise it there. And it's definitely not for people with a history of eating disorders. It definitely doesn't work in people with a history of binge eating disorders, so I wouldn't recommend it there. In all of our studies, we screen out people with a history of eating disorders, so we haven't noticed any. One of the main questions I get too is also, does it increase eating disorder risk? And in people that do not have a history of eating disorders, we don't see any changes in our studies. It doesn't exacerbate that, and we measure that with a bunch of different questionnaires. Another question I get is, well, does the eating window have to stay the same each day? So if I pick an 8-hour eating window to eat in, can I, if I have like a party on the weekend, can I like shift it later? Or if I have an early meeting the next day, can I maybe do like 8 to 4 one day and then 12 to 8? We typically say keep your window, you can move it around by like an hour or so. So if you're doing 12 to 8, sure, do 11 to 7 or 1 to 9. But you don't want to really swing it back and forth throughout the day. It's just really hard for your like internal body clocks to adjust to that, your circadian rhythm. So try to keep it within an hour or so. And then the other major question I get is, well, where exactly should you place it? So when you're deciding, you want 8-hour window, should I do it really early in the morning or late in the day? One thing we've learned from just circadian rhythm research is that our bodies are really good at processing food and nutrients right when we wake up in the morning. So right when you wake up, any kind of sugar you have, your body can deal with it really, really well. And then over the course of the day, your insulin sensitivity just starts to go down and down and down. So by the end of the day, our bodies can't put away sugar that well or deal with food. So in general, if you place the window earlier, you're probably going to get better changes in like blood sugar regulation. So it can lower diabetes risk factors more if you place it from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. But realistically, I don't think anyone's gonna do that. Like, who's gonna stop eating at 4 o'clock every day? Like, we actually designed studies where, like meal timing studies, where we had people, they had to stop eating by 1. And a lot of the people in our studies were the ones that were like cooking food. So they would like cook dinner that night and then just sit there and like drink water and watch their family like eat the meal they just spent an hour making. So, you know, it's definitely healthier to eat in the day and like stop. I think it was like Oprah who first said like stop eating after dinner or stop eating by 6. That's definitely true. Night snacking is not good for you. It really increases diabetes risk. So try to shift most of your food intake to earlier in the day, but you know, 12 to 8 is fine, but you know, try to stop eating after dinner if you can. And yeah, if you're interested in any further reading on this, we have this comprehensive overview of intermittent fasting in Nature Reviews. And yeah, I just want to thank all my students who ran all these trials. They've been amazing. And we've been funded primarily by the National Institutes of Health for the study. And yeah, if you're interested in research updates or any practical tips on intermittent fasting, please follow me on Instagram at Dr. Krista Varady. Thank you very much.